It's been 8 months to the day since several hundred nurses walked off the job at St. Vincent Hospital in Worcester because of what they said were staffing levels and other working conditions that made it impossible to keep patients safe.
The strike needs to end, and it needs to end now.
Well, I'm sure he's saying the same thing now. That was Worcester Mayor Joe Petty back in September, calling on the for-profit company that runs St. Vincent, that's Tenet Healthcare, to get their workers back on the job. But today, the company and the Massachusetts Nurses Association are still at odds. Tenet has hired a couple hundred replacement nurses, closed hundreds of inpatient beds since the start of the strike, even as Delta caused another COVID surge in the region. I'm joined now by longtime St. Vincent nurse and the co-chair of the Mass Nurses Association's local bargaining unit, Marlena Pellegrino. We also asked representatives from Tenet Healthcare to join us. They declined. Marlena, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
8 months is so long. If you had been told 9 months ago that you'd go on strike and 8 months later you'd still be out, would you have done it?
I would have done it. The conditions were that bad, and we had tried everything else. I would have never believed it that I would be out here for this long, but no regrets. This is something that we needed to do to advocate for our patients in the community. We tried everything else, and it didn't work with this corporation. And at a certain point, nurses had to take a stand. We did everything we could in the building to make our voices heard, and it didn't work. And it's time that we have to change the status quo in healthcare. It's not working for patients. They're being harmed.
My understanding is the critical issue for you, correct me if I'm wrong, were staffing levels in terms of what you consider to be safe and adequate patient care. And then I read a few months ago that it had been agreed upon, and then all of a sudden, again, correct me if I'm wrong, Tenet drops on you that, yeah, we'll agree to adequate staffing levels, but we're not going to agree to have X number of the nurses who've put their lives on the line here have their jobs guaranteed to return. Is that how it happened?
That's exactly right. About the middle of August 16th, we had met with the hospital. That was the last in-person meeting. And at that time, as nurses, we felt that what was on the table, what the hospital was offering for staffing, was something we could work with. It would provide better care for our patients, safer staffing. And we were ready very close at that time for a tentative agreement. You're talking 3 months later, and their return to work agreement that they slid across the table that day was one retaliatory page after the other, and not returning nurses to their previous position is nothing more than punishment for standing up for advocating for our patients. It's unheard of and unprecedented in any labor dispute. The settlement, when the two parties come together, they're ready to settle. The nurses return to their previous positions to maintain safety and stability. That's when parties want to come together. What Tenet did was threw down a gauntlet and wanted to continue the war. And it's just not something that we can agree to have over 100 nurses lose their positions.
100. How long have you been a nurse?
I've been a nurse for 35 years.
How long have you been at St. Vincent?
I've been there I graduated from there, and I've been there 35 years. I've never worked anywhere else. Same unit, same shift. I love being a staff nurse. How
are you and your colleagues surviving through 2/3 of a year? How have you made it?
It's pretty unbelievable. It takes a lot of stamina and fortitude. There's good and bad days. No kidding aside, this is challenging. It affects you psychologically, physically. It takes a toll on your family members.
How do you pay your bills?
Well, nurses are very creative, and we are working. We are taking temporary positions everywhere. We're doing vaccine clinics, hospitals, rehab centers. They're opening our arms to us, throughout the state. We're caring for patients. We'd rather be caring for patients at St. Vincent Hospital, but it appears they don't want us all back there. So we are taking care of patients in the community.
I have to say, I assume when I looked this up today that Tenet would attempt to shield how profitable they were, because how else do you rationalize not rehiring nurses, most of whom have been there for a long time, maybe not as long as you. How do you rationalize shutting down beds that are necessary in a community in the middle of a pandemic? I looked up these numbers. They have had a wildly hundreds of millions of dollars of profit in 2021. So when you're sitting at the table, how do they rationalize making the kinds of cuts and engaging in the kind of retaliation? And I agree, the word is appropriate, I think. How do they rationalize either of those things?
They really don't. There actually is no shame in this corporation. They have profited off a pandemic. They've profited off of patient suffering. They make no bones about how much money they make. This is purely, there's a different agenda here than when we started the strike. Tenant has made it clear. They'd like to make an example of the St. Vincent Hospital nurses across the country. The strike apparently is now being watched across the country and the world. And if you're able to take down a group of nurses who stood up for their patients and silence their voices and diminish their union rights, that sends a message across this country for labor and for workers everywhere. And that is clearly what they want to do here. It's very sad, and it's really it's a red flag for every American, for every person who's ever been a patient, who will be a patient, for every family member, that a for-profit corporation can do this and affect healthcare in this way. Very dangerous.
What kind of anger do you feel? What kind of anger do you feel towards this company? Again, I repeat, this is a for-profit hospital, which to a lot of people sounds oxymoronic. How do you feel about this place after dedicating your whole damn work life to these
Right.
patients?
I feel very, what their behavior has been what I would call very embarrassing for a healthcare corporation. I feel very sad that they would do something like this. Obviously, there is anger and frustration. We try to uplift each other on the picket line. We've been there for 245 days. Mostly what we think about is how they are self-serving to the point where they would put aside taking care of patients safely. They're harming our community. They're harming our entire state for their own power, greed, and ego. And that is very sad. It's disturbing. So I'm not an angry person. I'm an optimistic person, but nurses are very tough. And when you get in front of our ability to care for our patients, we become very, very like Mama Bears. That's something that's wrong, and we cannot. Our conscience will not allow that.
Marlene, I know it doesn't pay the bills, but I think I speak for virtually everybody watching. You and your colleagues have been an inspiration to all of us. So we wish you luck, and we hope this ends tomorrow. Thanks so much for your time.
Yes, we do too. Thank you very much. We really appreciate everyone's support.
Thank you.